Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. Just one thing to remind you about, that's the Ogilvy-Renault Patent Drafting Workshop, November the 5th. There are still a few spots available. If you're interested, go to the Mars website, the event page, and click on the Best Practices button, and you can register there. Okay, so tonight, Intro to Tech Companies and Business Creation. I'm delighted to welcome a return speaker, Raphael Ronen. Raphael is a commercialization manager at the Innovations Group. Those of you at U of T, I think, should be well familiar with TIG, which handles commercialization of inventions from the U of T community. Basically, TIG works with scientists and inventors to create commercial viability from their research ideas. Raphael gets involved in licensing and has had a number of successful corporate spinouts. And I think a lot of what happens there at the university is equally applicable to private sector spinouts. The same questions apply. Which is the best business model? Do you go with licensing? Do you go with a startup? And I think this builds nicely on last week's lecture, which was really touching on, are you a consultant? Are you services? Or are you a product company? Just as background, Raphael has an engineering degree from Waterloo and a Master of Science in Medical Biophysics at UWO. And then, like many of the rest of us, fell off the straight and narrow and got into business, and is now focusing on helping people with great ideas turn those into commercial reality. Raphael has a terrible cold, and I do want to express my real appreciation for him coming out tonight to give this. However, as a precaution, for those of you who want to come and talk with him afterwards, I've just brought in a hand washing station. So we try to take care of everything at Mars. So without further ado, Raphael Ronen.
Well, Tony, thank you for that nice introduction. I'm a big proponent of the Entrepreneurship 101 series. I think there's a lot of value that comes out of it. And so I was really thrilled to be asked back again this year to give this lecture. As Tony mentioned, my name's Raphael. Wow, my first slide is gone. My name's Raphael Ronen. I work with the Innovations Group, which is the commercialization wing of the University of Toronto. I realize that this is only your third lecture, so we're going to cover a fair number of topics today, and then delve deeper into some topics that I'm particularly familiar with and that I think are relevant. We're fortunate that our offices are located in the Mars building, just across the hall on the 3rd floor. This is a great place to meet people and get things done. To give you a feel for what I do, I've taken a quote from my executive director, Tim McTiernan. And what he said was, at TIG, at the Innovations Group, we bring together researchers and businesses to capitalize on the ideas that are developed at the university and in some of the affiliated hospitals. And moreover, there's over $2 million worth of research that goes on every day. And what that means is that myself and my colleagues, we see a lot of great science, we see a lot of great technology, and we spend a lot of time sifting through that technology, trying to find those technologies that are going to be commercially successful, that are going to make great products. So everything I do is basically encapsulated in this slide. It all starts with an idea. For me, generally that idea comes from a researcher. It comes out of research where a new idea is created, someone finds a way to do something better. Then we spend a lot of time assessing that technology. Really, we're trying to determine if it's worthwhile putting money and putting time into moving it forward. If we determine it is good, if it is worth pursuing, we move down two tracks. The first is where I spend most of my time in business development. And for me, business development involves patenting. It involves marketing the technology, because really in everything you do, you're always selling. You might be selling to potential investors, you might be selling to potential partners, and down the road, you really hope that you're selling to customers. Business development also means planning out the business, so the business plan, both looking short-term, the next 6 months, how is this technology, how is this business going to get off the ground, and also looking down the road, when is it going to be successful, how much is it going to make, and those are important questions to address because they give us a feel of what the value is today, and if it's worth pursuing, and in what manner. Now, the other stream is technology development. And this I generally leave to those people who are still focused on the science and on the engineering. So I'm not really going to touch on the technology development. But through these two phases, we're really building value. And we know that we've built value when someone's willing to give us money. And for me, someone willing to give me money means that they're willing to finance a company that I've helped to start, or it means that they're willing to license my technology, and licensing is really the manner in which technologies are generally sold. So today I'm going to break down my talk along two basic paths. First, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about how we assess technology and some aspects of business development. As I said earlier, we spend an awful lot of time on this, probably more than any other speaker you'll have in. And I think I can give you a lot of insights. And this will help you understand your product and your company's strengths and also its limitations. After that, I'm going to touch on what I call lessons learned from the academic setting. These are circumstances that come up quite frequently in the academic setting, and you might touch on a couple of times in your business. So I'm going to touch on them because I don't think anybody else is, and I think they're quite important. So first, when I assess technology, I've historically looked at 4 factors. I've looked at the intellectual property, I've looked at the technology, the market, and the team. About a week ago, Tony and I were talking, and we're talking about this lecture, and he was telling me how he wanted to make this series sort of bridge beyond the standard corporate model and also include social entrepreneurship and basically social factors as a whole. And I really didn't know what he was talking about. But giving it a little more thought, I realized that we actually think about social factors in everything we do. I'll certainly give more attention to an idea that has the potential to have a strong impact. So, for example, improve healthcare in third world countries. I'll give that more attention. For me, it's implicit, but for this talk, I'm going to make it explicit, and we can sort of both work through it together in the examples and see how it fits in. Realizing this is only your 3rd lecture, and you probably haven't been introduced to patents formally, I'm going to go through a bit of an intellectual property primer. In the technology field, when we talk about intellectual property, we're predominantly talking about patents. Copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks are other forms of intellectual property protection, and will protect your ideas, will protect your name, will protect your identity in different ways. But I'm going to focus on patents. And the principle behind patents are that the governments from around the world are willing to reward you for sharing your ideas with them. And if you've ever written a patent or you've ever read a patent, you see that it describes an idea, and it fully describes an idea. In fact, it has to. And at the end of the patent, there are claims. And the claims are, let's say, the crux of the invention. That's what the person is trying to get a monopoly on. And so when you get a patent, you get a monopoly. You're the only person who's allowed to use your idea from 20 years on from the date of filing. Now, governments are willing to do this because they see a greater good. They realize that after 20 years, anybody will be able to use your technology. And that's why today, when I was feeling miserable, I could go to the drugstore, I could pick up some ibuprofen for cents a pill. It's because it was a drug that's now off patent, so there are generic companies that are making it, and the price has fallen. So the good is being met. So why does it make sense to patent? Well, if you're looking at patenting, you believe that you've developed something great. You believe it's better than what your competitors have. And you believe by better, it means you're going to sell more of it, or you're going to be able to sell it at a higher price. And that's going to give you an advantage over your competitors. A patent gives you that sustainable advantage for the life of the patent. Patents also make a lot of sense because they encourage people to invest in research and development. Nobody's going to invest in R&D if at the end of a long investment, their competitor can come along and take that technology and sell that technology. What mostly happens within companies is they'll have a good idea, they'll get some initial data, they'll file a patent. They'll then take the next while, years even, to develop those ideas, to invest in the research and development. Then, when they're ready for sale, they have a number of years left on the patent, and in that time, they're looking to recoup all the costs that they paid into it, and they're looking for a profit. I think there's no better example than the pharmaceutical industry. Now, they claim that it costs anywhere from $500 million to $1.2 billion to bring a drug to market. And so you can imagine, if you're making that sort of investment, you want some assurance that you're going to be able to make your money back. Without patents, we wouldn't have that. So that's your IP primer. Let's now start to look at the strength of an intellectual property position, what you're looking for. So the first real question that you have to ask yourself is, can I get a patent on my idea? And there are only 3 conditions you have to meet, and these conditions are worldwide, to get a patent. The first is novelty. It has to be new. And by new, I mean it can't be in the public domain. So if someone's published a paper on it, if there's a patent that's already out, if someone's talked about it at a seminar, if someone's selling it, it's in the public domain, it's no longer new, it's not patentable. The second criteria is non-obviousness. And this is a bit of a gray area, and I'll leave the patent agent, who I think is coming in later, to go into more detail. The basic idea is I can't take 2 patents, put them together in some obvious manner, and call it a new invention. That's not allowed. The third factor is utility, and for most purposes, you just have to think about it in terms of your patent has to be useful. It can't be a frivolous patent. Now, 2 other factors I'm going to talk about are often glazed over, but are very important. The first is freedom to practice or freedom to operate. I'm going to demonstrate this through an example. So let's say that you have a product that you're selling, and that product is based on a patent that you filed. But maybe that product also makes use of someone else's patent. So by selling your technology, you're making use of their patent, you're infringing on their patent. And that's to say you don't have freedom to sell your technology, you don't have freedom to operate. Now, there are ways to cope with that. Licensing is the predominant way to cope with that. You basically go to that person and say, I will buy your technology, I will license your technology from you. But if you find that there are a lot of patents out there that your invention is going to infringe, you might say, this really isn't an invention that's worth pursuing. The other point is your intellectual property defensible? Is infringement detectable? Let's say you develop an algorithm. Someone takes that algorithm and embeds it deeply within their software. So deeply that you really have no way to know whether or not they're using your algorithm. Well, if you have no way to know that they're using your algorithm, you can't detect that they're infringing, you can't go after them, and in fact, makes your patent valueless. So a question that I often get is, what are the costs of patenting, and what are the timelines associated with it? So the general pathway I take, and I think it's the most common pathway, is you start with a provisional patent. And a provisional patent is a scaled-down patent. It doesn't need everything that's in there, but it does need to hold all the details of your invention. Now, you can draft your own provisional patent. You can file it with the US Patent Office online for $105. You can file it with the Canadian Patent Office for $200. But what I would strongly recommend is that you engage a patent agent to vet your patent, to improve it, and that will cost you between $2,000 and $4,000. It's really not that much of an investment. And you have a year. And after that year, you might find that your invention just hasn't gone anywhere. Nobody's interested in it. You might cut your losses and abandon it at this point. Or you might want to continue with it. And what we generally do is we file what's called a PCT. Think of it as a placeholder. And at this stage, you need a full patent, so you definitely need to engage a patent agent. Drafting of a patent will probably cost you between $6,000 and $9,000. Then you have filing fees, so expect to pay another $10,000 to $12,000 at this point. At the end of these 18 months, you have to choose what countries you want to enter. And this is where it gets expensive. For whichever countries you enter, you're going to be going back and forth with their patent offices, with their patent examiners, and hopefully at the end of the day, you'll get your patent issued. The most reliable numbers I've seen, and from personal experience I found them true, are that to file in Canada and the US, you're looking at about $25,000, and that's everything from the provisional to the issuance. If you add in Europe and Japan, you're looking at spending another $50,000. A lot of that is in translation fees. And of course, for every other country that you file in, you're going to spend more money. There have been a lot of great inventions that have been patented. This is Velcro, great. The airbag, also great. Also, there have been a lot of useless patents that have been filed that have never made any money. This is the anti-eating face mask. This is a dietary aid. Clearly, you can't eat when you have this on. You can see why it didn't catch on and why this has never made any money. Here's another great invention. This is a hyper light speed antenna, which allows signals to travel great distances at many times the speed of light. That's also not possible if you didn't know it. So this patent got issued, but it's worthless because it doesn't work. Here's one of my favorite patents. This is a device to exercise your cat. It's a laser pointer. No, you laugh, but this was filed in the early 90s, so when laser pointers were coming out. And it's a great idea, because everybody who has a cat and is too lazy to chase it around has a laser pointer. But what's the problem with this patent? Well, I can take this laser pointer, which I bought for my presentation. I can go home, and I can shine it around, exercise my cat, and I'll never pay this person a dime. It's a great idea, but they have no way of enforcing their patent. So we went through intellectual property. Let's talk about technology now. When I look at technology, I look at four basic factors. I say, is a scientific basis understood? Do we know why it works? Is there data to support why it works? How developed is the technology? Is it a product or is it an idea? And if it's at an earlier stage, does the team that's involved have the abilities to bring it to that final product? But really, at the end of the day, I'm asking myself, is it real and will it work? And this is a question that I strongly encourage you to ask yourselves when you're at this stage. People often get very hyped up about their ideas, but you really want to take a very cynical, realistic look at your technology and determine what its chances of actually delivering are. Most people have trouble executing and bringing it all the way. The other point I want to make is that there is a huge amount of value in having developed technology. Because once your technology is developed, nobody's going to ask the first four questions. You've shown not only that your technology works, but you've shown that you can make it work, so it proves you as well. Show this through an example. So I used to work at the Robarts Research Institute, which is based in London, Ontario. It's another medical research institute. And about 10 years ago, some graduate students, some technicians, wanted to create a micro CT device. So for those of you who don't know, CTs are a way of rotating X-rays 360 degrees, and that allows you to recreate a three-dimensional image. Micro CT does it on a smaller scale, and you want much higher resolution, you want much higher image quality. So here, this is a rat skeleton. These are rat lungs, really great images. So when this company got started, they knew how to make it work, and they got the technology working rather quickly. And that allowed them to get their first customer in, which gave them money, which allowed them to build additional products, get additional sales. They really springboarded off of having good technology. They never had a patent. I'm going to talk about marketing team later, but it's also worth saying that when they sold their first system, the size of the market was zero. No, it was one. It was the guy who bought their first system, because nobody was making these at the time. That being said, there were also no competitors. And they also had a great team, which is worth mentioning, where they managed to get sales up and going quickly. So let's talk a little bit about the market. This is a huge list of things to look at when you're looking at the market. I'm going to go through it with an example. So For those of you who watch Dragon's Den, you might have seen Stephen Rawl. They were on about a year ago, and they've made the highlight reel every so often. And Stephen Rawl were dealing with their grandparents, and they realized that their grandparents really didn't like using the computer. Go figure, Windows. They found it complicated, and it just wasn't comfortable. So they went out and developed this. This is software that basically sits on top of Windows. Very simple user interface, very simple to use. As you can see, there are 5 buttons: internet, photos, mails, games, turn off your computer. It takes away all the options that you don't need. It makes the letters big. It's easy to use. So let's take a look. Whoop. Is the need well defined? Well, clearly, there are elderly people who don't like using computers. Does a product address the need? It in fact does. What's the market like? Well, quite frankly, I can't think of a larger market than the elderly and people who are growing into that. And a lot of those people just aren't comfortable with technology. Competition? Well, at first when you look at this, you say competition is huge. You have to deal with Windows, you have to deal with Apple, and then you have those Unix guys as well who are doing something on the side. But the truth of the matter is, nobody's really developed a niche product to meet the needs of the elderly. So in fact, in this case, you could say competition is quite low. What's time to market like? They're out there, they're selling it. It was very short. What's the profit margin like? Basically, when I say profit margin, I'm saying, how are you going to make money? In this case, they're not making a lot per sale, but they can have volume sales, and it doesn't cost them money to have volume sales, and that's how they're going to make their money. Do they know who their market receptors are? Well, in fact, they do. The first is retirement homes. And so if you go to their website, they used to be soft shell, they're now called point-to-wear. If you go to their website, you can see which retirement homes now use their software and have it available to their clients. They also have individual people who are downloading the software to use. In fact, if your parents or grandparents need something like this, you can just download it from their website. Lastly, can you bring investment in? Well, the dragons on Dragon's Den were willing to give them money. I think that's a good sign. So here we look at it. Market factors, great. I'll tell you that I've never walked through a technology and actually had a check mark before every technology, except when I stepped back and looked at this one. Technology factors, it works. It's great. Intellectual property factors, I don't know what their IP stance is, but it's very hard to have good patents in this space. It's very hard to be able to carve out an area that's truly new. So it's probably not all that strong. Let's take a step back again. Impact, again, so let's talk about impact. And this, again, is my first time thinking explicitly about it. But I think that if you can connect grandparents with their grandchildren, if you can make people's lives more relevant, there's a strong social impact here. And I'd say that that would get a nice check mark. Here's a technology that I'm more used to dealing with. This is a medical device. This is developed out of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. And I should say that the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research really helped us in giving some funding to move this forward. So this is a way of treating prostate cancer. It's a probe that's inserted transurethral. I'm told it's not as painful as it looks. At the end of the probe are ultrasound transducers. They emit energy. And basically that energy kills all the tissue within the prostate. And at the same time, it kills all the tumor. So let's go through our list. 1, is the need well defined? Well, I can tell you that the technologies that are out there now take a long time, and the recovery times are quite long, and there are a lot of complications following it. Is this product going to address that need? Well, we hope so. We hope it's going to be faster. We hope the complications are lower. It looks good, but we're only going to know down the road when we have more clinical trials. The market is huge. The saying is, for men, if you don't die of prostate cancer, you die with prostate cancer. Every man in this room will develop prostate cancer in their life. Competition is brutal because the market is huge. And if you look at a market that is very profitable, you're going to be entering a market that has a lot of competition. Time to market is also lengthier with this sort of thing. We have clinical trials we have to go through. We have regulatory approval. This is not going to be on the shelf next year or the year after. But once it does get there, there are reimbursement schemes in place. It has the potential to generate a lot of revenue. Market receptors can be easily identified. Yes, we're going to be selling to the urologists, we're going to be selling to the urorad clinics, we're going to be selling to the hospitals, we're going to be selling to oncologists. We know who we're selling to. Can you bring an investment? Well, actually, we got this company funded in August of last year, and I'm betting that it was the last medical device company in Canada to get funded before we saw that credit crunch happen. So it could get funded, and let's wait another 6 months to a year and see another few get funded. So, through my list of 5 factors, market factors, definitely more good than bad. The technology is good. When we went out for investment, it was fully functioning. We had good preclinical data. The intellectual property is quite strong. That's not to say that there aren't some patents out there that we're a little nervous about. And if we look at impact, I would say that if this device does prove to reduce side effects, then the impact is very strong. If this device just proves to be as good as what's out there, then you have to ask, is the impact that strong or not? On to really our last core factor, which is the team, which I think is perhaps the most important. So here we ask, can your team do it? Do they have the development capabilities? And are they willing to invest the time to make it happen? Are they committed to it? And of course, do they have realistic expectations? Do they understand what's involved so that they're not going to get scared down the road? If they have commercialization experience, that's great. It's certainly not required. Everybody gets their first experience at some point. At the end of the day, for me, it comes down to this. Are the people who are involved, are they reasonable people? Are they ethical? Because it's really just not worth your time to deal with people who aren't ethical. Can they work well together? Because they're going to be working closely together and there's going to be stress. And can they execute? Can they deliver? Will something generate at the end of the day? Now, I'm going to spend another moment talking about this slide because I've seen a lot of companies do exceptionally well because of their team, and I've seen a few struggle because of the team. Many companies that start with engineers, a team of engineers start up a company. And many of these companies are very successful because one of those engineers has been able to transition to the business side. They've been able to do the sales. They've been able to build relationships. They've had that capacity. And there are just numerous examples of very successful companies where we see this happen. Now, I've also seen a company where the engineer just wasn't able to make that transition. He was always an engineer. He was always tinkering. And that company really struggled. One last point I'm going to make here. As you go out, you're going to talk to people within Mars. You're going to talk to a lot of advisors. And if you just have an engineering or a science background, they're going to say, we're concerned that you don't have someone with business experience here. And I'd agree. It's valuable to have someone with business experience. That being said, you're going to work very closely with this person, and you probably don't know this person as well as you'd like. My advice is, when you bring someone on to your baby, to your company, to your project, start off with them as a consultant and pay them. And then after 3 or 6 months, if they're good, then you can convert them to full-time. If you want, put them in as a CEO, put them in as VP Business Development, put them in as a COO. But have that transition time where you can get to know them. If it doesn't work out, you just pay them their consulting fees and you have their work, and that's great. And if it does work out, then you have strong management that you know that you can work well with. So this is a summary of what I spoke about so far. I went through a lot of factors, and I hope you'll go through these factors when you think about your projects, when you think about your companies. And when you go through each of these, you're going to come to a decision point. And sometimes you're going to say, it's not worth going forward because there are too many other patents that are out there that block me. Or my customer just isn't going to pay me enough. There just isn't a model here that I'm going to make money off of this. That's fine. Go back to the drawing board. I've rarely seen an entrepreneur who's only done it once. Serial entrepreneurship is the standard. You'll have another great idea, and that other great idea you'll take on. At the end of this, if you do decide to go forward, use this assessment as a manner to understand where your strengths are and also understand where your limitations are and plan for them. I bring up these questions, and I bring up these questions because anybody who's interested in your company is also going to bring up these questions, and you want to be able to answer them, and you want to have planned for it. Now I'm going to talk about some specific areas that I feel are particularly relevant that I deal with regularly. The first is the question of licensing versus spinning off. So for those of you who are not familiar, licensing is basically selling your technology. You're selling it to another company. And you do this because they're going to give you money. And generally the structure for giving money is a royalty, which is a percentage of the sales that they make based on the product. So for example, I license something to another company, and they might pay me 5% of whatever they make from that technology. You also want to get some of your costs reimbursed, such as your patent costs. And there's a lot of flexibility in how you structure this deal, and I'm happy to talk to you about it later, or there are a lot of people who can give you advice. Within the pharmaceutical industry, milestones are very popular. So whenever the technology goes through its next stage, whenever it increases in value, you get a payment. So in the pharmaceutical industry, whenever it passes the clinical trials, you might get a payment back. Spin-offs are perhaps what you're more familiar with. This is what all entrepreneurs want to do. They want to create a company. And if you create a company, you are responsible and you have control over building your team, building your product, creating a sales force or finding someone to sell for you, and bringing in the financing, bringing in the money to make it happen. Your return generally happens when the company goes public because you are a shareholder. So when the company goes public, the shares are now easy to sell. Or if the company is acquired, or if the company actually becomes revenue positive and stops investing all its money in growth, then it might pay out dividends. Licensing makes sense if you have a company that is a good fit with your technology. So say I make a new catheter. It might make sense for me to license it to Boston Scientific because they have manufacturing facilities for catheters, because they have a sales force, they're out there selling their own product. They could sell my product as well, probably better than I could, and they could get it up and running faster than I could. You might consider licensing as well if you have an add-on technology. So let's say you build the next generation of plasma screens. Well, you might not want to build TVs, so it might make sense to license that to a company like Samsung or Sony. There are also time and risk constrictions. So if you don't want to invest the next few years of your life, it might make sense to license the technology. Or if you don't want to take on the risk yourself. At the end of the day, you're going to pass on control of your company. You're also passing on the responsibility, the sleepless nights, to someone else. Spinning off a company makes sense if you can't find a good company as a receptor for your technology. It also often makes sense if you have what we call a platform technology. And to me, a platform technology means you have a technology that you can sell into numerous different markets. And this gives you two large advantages. This first advantage is you have different markets, so in aggregate, you have more people to sell to. It also means you have more flexibility. If your primary goal, your primary path doesn't pan out, you have a secondary option and hopefully a tertiary option as well. You might consider spinning off a company if you want that large upside, if you're willing to put in the time and you want to, retire at 35. But you're going to need a committed team, and you're going to need a team that has a long-term perspective. At the end of the day, you spin off a company because you believe that you can do it better than anybody else can. One other thing that a lot of people don't think about is, what's the industry used to? If you're selling into an industry, you should understand if that industry normally licenses technologies or buys companies. So years ago, in dealing with Philips, people used to say that the Philips mantra was, if it's not Dutch, it's not much. Which sort of spoke to their attitude that they didn't like to license in technology, they'd like to develop their own. What I find in medical devices is that, with large companies like GE or Siemens or Philips, they prefer to let small companies fight it out amongst themselves, and then they have enough capital to buy out the winner. Other industries are much more license friendly. And you also have to have a feel for what sort of premium companies will pay for small companies versus paying for technology. At the end of the day, I mean, this is sort of a lot of people say this, I believe it to be true. You're going to spend 10 times more time developing a spin-off company compared to licensing a technology. So make an informed decision, know what you're getting into, do what you think is best to move the technology forward and what's best for you. Quick summary slide. Licensing makes sense if there's a good fit with another company or if you have an add-on technology. Startups make sense if you have a platform technology and if there's no good partner out there. Benefits of a license: takes less effort. You hopefully put it in the hands of someone who's more experienced, who can do it better, and you increase the chance of success. You at least increase the chance of yourself making some money. On the downside, you completely pass off control, and the returns might not be as high. Startups are great if you'd like to maintain control, at least at the beginning, and you might get higher returns. But it is time-consuming, and at the end of the day, you might end up with nothing. Let's talk a little bit about financing, about bringing in some money. So since I work at a university, I have a lot of access to grant funding. And I can tell, and grant funding is basically one of the mechanisms through which the governments provide money for innovation and for early stage development. And I can tell you that both the federal and especially the provincial government are very pro-innovation, very pro getting companies started, getting companies off the ground. If you work within an academic setting, NSERC and CIHR have great early stage funding. It's $125,000 to $150,000 for product development. They're called proof of principle or I2I grants. The Ontario Centres for Excellence have some market readiness. So if you're a company and you're doing some work with an academic center, you can tap into this. HTX has been around for 3 years. It's the Health Technology Exchange. They've been doing some very exciting things with funding early stage companies in the medical device sector. There's the Investment Accelerator funds, which is sort of, you can think about it as early stage VC. And in fact, Tony manages the IAF fund, which runs out of Mars. And then, of course, IRAP is a federal entity that's interested in creating jobs. So if you're a new company, they can provide you with funding to get off the ground. Funding to hire in people at the outset. I would also say keep a lookout on the Ministry of Research and Innovation website, their next generation of jobs. I think there are going to be a lot of exciting things that happen between January and April as they roll out their new vision. Once you're done with the government, there's always the 3 Fs, friends, family, and those foolish enough to invest in us. And then you move on to the more standard forms of investors, venture capitalists, and angels. I think it's worth talking about what the goals of the different funders are. Government is great. Government is the best place to get money because their goals are the same as yours. You want to hire people to work for you. They want jobs created. You want those people to be good. You want them to be highly qualified. They want you to train highly qualified people. You want to make money. They want to charge you taxes on the money you make. If you can get money through grants, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. I think the tax incentive programs that exist in Ontario and in Canada are the best in the world for Canadian-based companies. But understand, at the end of the day, anything you get from the government is a gift. That's why it's great. Angels and venture capitalists, they aren't your friends. They're not your enemies either. They just have their own agenda. And their goal is to make money for their limited partners, to make money for their shareholders. And they do that by getting multiples back on their investments. So when they invest in you, they want to make 5 to 10 times back what they put in, and they want to make it in a short period of time, 5 years. You might find those who are willing to go out to 10 years. You're going to get money from your VCs, your angels. More importantly, you want good guidance. If you're lacking marketing, especially with dealing with angels, try to find an angel who has that background. And lastly, contacts. There's one great example. A company, one of their investors was this radiology group out of the States. This company makes products for radiologists, so their investors were their first customers as well. great fit. Now, when you deal with an angel or venture capitalist, it's not a gift. They're not giving you the money, but they're not out to beat you down too much either. It's a negotiation. They want to get the most value they can back, and the best way for them to do that is to give you as little money and take as much of your company as possible. That's just their model. They're not bad people, but be prepared for it. Don't get offended. This is my last major topic I'm going to talk about, just because it's really not addressed otherwise, and it's worth thinking about. Who owns the intellectual property that you develop? If you work for a company, the company is paying you. They're paying you to develop technology for them. They own the technology. Now, some companies are great in that they recognize the value of new developments, and they'll reward their employees. You might get promotions. They might give you a few $1,000s per patent. You have to be careful if you've just left a company and you're starting your own business in a similar space. If you take technology, well, you can't take technology that was developed at the company. And if it's in a similar space, it's a bit of a gray area. My advice, first, definitely don't burn bridges. And two, talk to your old employer, talk to them about what you're doing, and get them on board, get consent from them before you move forward. Especially be careful and look back to the agreements you signed when you started with the company. Things like confidentiality agreements, non-solicitation agreements, and especially non-compete agreements. Now, working at a university or an academic institution is sort of an in-between place between doing it on your own and doing it with a company. And each university or institution likes to have their own policies. If you work at the University of Waterloo, you, the inventor, owns everything. Most universities, about 90% of them, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, SickKids, UHN, have a university or institution owns policy. So the institution owns the IP. And the University of Toronto has a bit of a mix. When the invention is conceived, both the inventor and the university jointly own it. And then it's the inventor's choice if they want to take on full ownership or if they want the university to take on full ownership. But remember earlier I said if you work for a company, you might get $1,000, you might get a couple $1,000s. If you work in an institution or a university, you're going to get at least 33% of whatever's made off of it. And depending on your institution and the IP policy, you might make up to 75%. So it's really a great deal and a great place for innovation to happen because you personally are going to be rewarded for creating new things and helping to commercialize them. Final point on this slide. Research is increasingly being funded by industry. And there's a great partnership that's going on there because the industry adds relevance to the research and the research pushes technology forward. But you have to be aware if you're working in this setting that you might not own the intellectual property, that the company might have some rights to it. So if you think you might be in this position, just talk to the scientists you're working with or contact your tech transfer office. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to invest in your company unless they know that you have rights to the intellectual property. So if you work within the university or within an institution, this is what I do. This is what tech transfer offices do. First, we cover your patent costs, which is huge, as I showed earlier. Two, we're going to help you along in developing your business plan, developing your commercialization strategy. There are also a number of those grants I spoke about earlier. They're actually only accessible if you work with your tech transfer office. And even if you're going for other ones, we certainly have a lot of experience here. We can help you create a startup company. We do them all the time. We have the right contacts to help you along. We can also share our contact list if you're going out to raise financing. And we spend a lot of time negotiating. And so if you find yourself in one of those positions, we're happy to help you out. Final slide. These are my lessons learned, things to take away if you have been sleeping this entire presentation. First, understand your customer. It's really incredible how many people don't understand their customer. And they develop a product or go down a path, and it really doesn't meet someone's need, or it really doesn't meet the need of the person who makes the buying decision. And this is such an easy problem to overcome because it just involves talking to people and finding out what they need, find out who the decision makers are. And frankly, people like talking to entrepreneurs. You're an exciting bunch for those of us who have day jobs. Second, when you, in an academic setting, we often find a large disconnect between science and business. I would say engineering business, technology and business also all holds. People feel that once the technology is working, or once the science is sound, that they're 95% of the way there. And there's just this 5% left, which is the business, the marketing, the sales, the financing, and so on. So just respect the other side of it. Understand how much more there is to do and what else is in front of you. Lastly, I'll say stay honest. Many people start into the business realm and they feel that they have to fit this stereotype of the hard-nosed entrepreneur or of the hard-nosed businessman, especially when they deal with venture capitalists and so on. You don't. And at the end of the day, your company might fail, but if you've been good, if you've been honest, then when you start your next venture, you'll have people behind you supporting you because they trust you after working with you the first time around. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I learned a lot, and hopefully, thank you, all of you did as well. So at this point, I'm obviously going to open it up to any questions that the room may have. Hopefully there are a few, and then we'll end the evening.
What kind of patents do you see coming through your office, generally speaking? Like, what areas do you have to see?
So the question is, what sort of patents do we see coming through our office? So our office is broken into 3 sectors, physical science and engineering, IT, and life sciences. I would say the life sciences probably sees the most activity out of the university, but the physical sciences and the IT teams both see a lot of technology, and really across the board.
You left us hanging with the micro-CT story. So was there a problem with the fact that they didn't get a patent for the technology?
Oh, sorry, I should have ended that story. No, they sold their company and did very, very well. So they, at the end of the day, they didn't need a patent because they had the best technology that was out there, and they weren't infringing on anybody's patent. It was all known. That's a great question. I'll have to go back and take a look at that patent. You know what, I'm not entirely sure what they patented. They might have patented the use of the laser pointer for exercising your cat. So not the actual laser pointer, but its use. I've never had anybody ask me that. Oh, the list of funders, is that it? Let me just go back to that. Yeah, MRI is the Ministry of Research and Innovation. So it's the Ontario ministry that's responsible for innovation and for funding, basically, small companies and funding new technologies. I'm sorry? Sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing, but my recommendation is if you go to the Ministry of Research and Innovation website, you can clearly see what they're looking for. Their primary goals, and most government's primary goals, is to create jobs. And so if you have an idea and it's going to create jobs, then it probably fits within their mandate. Okay, so good question. If your company is doing very well, then venture capitalists will put in more money if they think that there's still a value proposition there. So it's not like 5 years and we're out. And then the real question comes to what sort of debt or what sort of instrument you've used to bring in the money. Often it's equity only. So basically, the venture capitalists will own part of the company. If the company dies, nobody ends up with anything. And so you don't have any debt. Some people take on what's called venture debt, which is a slightly different instrument, but still, it's generally the company that takes on that debt. And so if the company doesn't succeed, you're generally not personally liable. But certainly look into it if you're at that stage.
So thank you very much for your great question. And my question is that the company has gone through patent 5 or 6 patents in a shorter time. Do you recommend them to patent in different countries?
So the question is, if you want to patent multiple technologies shortly together, I would say it completely depends on how much money you have. Is really the question, and if you think you can get value out of going international. I mean, patents just take a long time to process. Most patent offices are backed up, and so you're going to be waiting regardless of which countries you go into. Good question. So the question is, if we come to the tech transfer office for help, what's in it for us? So if you work for, so you work at U of T? Okay. Well, if you work at U of T, this is how the model works. You have the option to take on the technology yourself, and you will keep 75% of whatever you make from that technology, and 25% of that technology will go back to the university. And it makes sense because that's where the initial work was done. It goes back to the public sector. If you work for an institution that has a institution owns policy, so like UHN, Sick Kids, Mount Sinai, you have no choice. If you developed it at that institution, then you have to disclose it to the tech transfer office. And then it's shared. And each institution has their own IP policy to describe that. But if you believe you can do better commercializing your technology on your own without the tech transfer office, they'll probably be willing to give it to you, under some terms, because both sides just want to see the technology developed.
Does this work for alumni as well?
So no, I mean, the tech transfer offices work exclusively with the university or with the institution, but there are other resources available to the masses. So Mars itself has a venture group, and they're willing to work with anybody. It's great that they have that. But the tech transfer offices, we're happy to talk to you, but we really can't invest our time because we're being paid from the university. Well, great. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thanks for coming out this evening. We certainly appreciate your time. Just a quick preview into next week. Tony and I are going to do a co-teaching lecture all about the nuts and bolts of basically building an enterprise, both focused on the for-profit ventures and also the social entrepreneurship / nonprofit ventures as well. So thanks again and enjoy your evening.